All righty. Hello, and welcome to my lecture on Chapter 9 of the Lifespan on Physical, Cognitive, and Identity Development in Adolescence. So, objectives. Describe sequential processes in adolescent physical development from hormones that trigger events to corresponding changes in the brain and body, and explain how environmental and hereditary factors affect timing of puberty. Explain behavioral and emotional changes in adolescence, including a discussion of mood, depression, and the emergence of adult sexuality, and identify factors that shape these changes as well as vulnerabilities that pose threats. And describe changes in cognitive functioning in adolescence, characterized by Piaget as formal operational thought, and examine broad implications of these cognitive advances, including the effects of egocentrism on adolescent life. And assess levels of exploration and commitment in adolescent identity formation and support healthy and developmentally appropriate identity construction. So, physical development in adolescence. So, glandular awakening, the kisspeptin chemical signals puberty's beginning. There's a cascade of events in the brain and body that follows. Gonadotropin releasing hormone activates reproductive axis, and other hormones are released and cause a series of changes as well. And you can see table 9.1 in your book for the sequence of physical changes with puberty. There is growth of pubic hair, growth of breasts mark the onset of puberty as well. Menarche and spamarche occur near the end of puberty. Timing is influenced by genetic and environmental factors, inactivity, nutrition, stress, exposure to chemicals, and there's a higher rate of early puberty for boys and girls in the United States of America. And it is said that, or it is said, I have had conversations with different doctors in the past, and they talked about how hormones being added to our foods, like chicken and different things, have led to larger breast sizes and earlier puberty age for children in the United States. So maybe that's something for you guys to look at, research a little further if you'd like. Here's a little slide that I found on physical changes associated with puberty. So I'll zoom in a little bit. So looking at girls, it talks about breast growth, the mean age at which you see breast growth occurring, growth spurt, pubic hair, peak strength spurt, peak height spurt, weight, menarche, which is period, adult stature, pubic hair growth is completed, and breast growth is completed. And so you see a range of the youngest age to the oldest age, right? So I mean, even looking at menarche, I had classmates in third grade that were 9 years old that started their period. So can start really young, doesn't have to start at 10 or 12 or what have you. And then I've also met people that didn't start their period till maybe junior year, sophomore year, so 16, 17. And then with boys, you see physical changes here, biological male body. Growth spurt begins, testes and scrotum grow larger, pubic hair appears, penis growth begins, spamarche, peak height spurt, peak weight spurt, voice lowers, facial and underarm hair begins, penis and testes growth completed, peak strength spurt, adult stature, and pubic hair growth is completed. And those are just some things. So, okay, why does this apply to counseling, right? So, you guys might be getting adolescents that come into counseling and they're struggling with adapting to their bodies changing, right? If you've got any clients that are struggling with sexual identity or gender identity, this could also be something that is influencing any kind of distress that they might be experiencing. Maybe they feel as though their biological sex is who they actually are, and their body's becoming more like that opposite sex that they don't want to be. And so that could just be something to consider. I've had a number of teenage girls for clients and talking to them about starting their period and how that can affect mood swings and how it can affect bipolar disorder and depression and these different things. So it may not always be the most comfortable subject, but you can normalize it and make it a more comfortable subject by talking about it with them and not making it this awkward, weird thing to discuss with a client. But yes, absolutely. I mean, even into adulthood, I've seen a lot of women's periods affect depression and anxiety. So something to be mindful of. All right, so adolescent growth spurt and the changing brain. So there's a rapid increase in size and changes in the body shape and the proportions. There's a 10-inch height increase for all, 42 for boys and 38 for girls, roughly. I'm not really sure exactly what that pound symbol is supposed to mean, but I'm guessing that it means like an average or around 42, around 38. It's 2 years earlier for girls than for boys, so girls will get taller than boys sooner. There's an increase in internal and external sexual dimorphism, which is differences between the sex. So breast growth, for example, and then brain changes, circuitry is reorganizing, and there's increased plasticity. The gray matter volume decreases, white matter increases. There's faster information processing and strengthened synapses. There's a slow decrease in serotonin levels and a rise in dopamine levels. So imbalance in adolescent brain development. Different regions mature at different rates. The subcortical areas mature faster, including limbic system and nucleus accumbens. There's emotional reactivity, risk-taking, and attraction to peers. The prefrontal cortex, which is more involving the more rational processes of the brain. Prefrontal cortex is up here in front, behind the forehead, and it matures more slowly. Planning, control function, and evaluation of risk is involved in that. So that's why you see teenagers making bad decisions, is because they don't have that full development of the prefrontal cortex that actually doesn't finish developing until about age 25, which I think it says that somewhere in this slideshow. Neural connection of the prefrontal cortex to the subcortical is in flux. Approach and avoidance systems mature at different rates, or circuitry between systems is lagging. The effects of this involve increased sensation seeking and risk taking, and the stress system becomes more responsive. So looking at an image of the brain, so the coloration of the brain is different across the brain based on gray matter volume. So the closer it is to purple, the less gray matter there is in the brain. So the time-lapse MRI of brain human development between ages 5 and 20 show the growth and then gradual loss of gray matter, which consists of cells that process information. Red areas contain more gray matter, blue areas less. Paradoxically, the thinning of gray matter that starts around puberty corresponds to increasing cognitive abilities. This probably reflects improved neural organization as the brain pairs redundant connections and benefits from increasing in the white matter that helps brain cells communicate. There are also gender differences in brain development, as Urion and Jensen explain. The part of our brain that processes information expands during childhood and then begins to thin, peaking in girls at roughly 12 to 14 years old and in boys. I'm assuming that got cut off from the image. So in boys, I'm going to guess probably between 13 and 15. So continuing on. So growing a grown-up brain, scientists have long thought that the human brain was formed in early childhood, but by scanning children's brains with an MRI year after year, they discovered that the brain undergoes radical changes in adolescence, as we've been discussing. Excess gray matter is pruned out. So pruning means the brain trims what it doesn't use. So if I start learning Spanish at the age of 5, but I stop using it after the age of 6 and never really speak it ever again, what happens? My brain trims that information out because it's not using it. So I forget Spanish, right? So in that pruning process makes brain connections more specialized and efficient. So the parts of the brain that control physical movement, vision, and the senses mature first, while the regions in the front that control higher thinking, prefrontal cortex, don't finish the pruning process until the early 20s, right? So it's just affirming everything we saw in the last slide. And then judgment is the last to develop. So here's another image showing that. The area of the brain that controls executive functions, including weighing long-term consequences and controlling impulses, is among the last to fully mature. Brain development from childhood to adulthood. So you see the 5-year-old brain, the preteen brain, teen brain, and a 20-year-old brain. Why does this matter? Why is this important, right? We want to be able to know whether a client is in a position where they aren't fully developed to be able to think in certain ways, right? So if I'm talking about decision making with a 5-year-old, that's going to look a lot different than it's going to be with a 15-year-old. They've got totally different cognitive abilities. And so you want to be mindful of the brain development of a client that's sitting in front of you. Are they 25 or not? Was there substance use or not? Because that can have an effect on the brain's development, where it can stunt it or damage it. Has the client in front of you had a traumatic brain injury? Did the client in front of you have a speech or language delay? Different things like that, because if you know about any injuries or delays or different things, you can help a client feel more understood, target certain issues to work with them on relevant to self-esteem or self-talk or a number of different issues, depression, anxiety, lots of different things. But yes, you want to understand the client that's sitting before you, because you're going to have a different conversation with a 20-year-old compared to a 5-year-old, like I was mentioning, because their brains are in totally different spots. The worksheets would look the same. The conversation is going to look the same. The intervention even might look the same, right? Like I've done play therapy with a little kid, but I've also done a play therapy with an adult in different ways. So it can look the same, but it can also look very different. And you want to be mindful of your client's development when you're using different interventions. Here's a fun little image that I found on neuroanthropology.net. And so it's just an image demonstrating the different parts of an adolescent's brain. So you see multitasking going on in the medulla and the cerebellum back here. In the prefrontal cortex up here, you see environmental factors, impulsivity. You see sleep deprived, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's your occipital lobe. Clever. This is your temporal lobe is in this area. And then you see self-induced learning ability, and then alcohol, substance use could be up here, and that's that dopamine seeking part of the brain. Here's another image. So the average teenage brain, showing other different things that represent what different parts do, right? So the love lobe, prefrontal cortex, the ego, rebellion center, love for parents, hate for parents, coolness gauge, body language lobe, TV storage, awkwardness, addiction to Facebook and the phone, slamming, punching reflex, ego, personality fluctuation, the answers, reading, writing, solving math, like or hate lobe, communication skills, memory for chores, balance, coordination, judgment, gland, which I'm guessing is the pineal gland, but I'd have to double check. I haven't looked at my lobe knowledge in a minute. Okay, so I grabbed this splurge of information, the next couple slides, from a BetterHelp article on adolescent brain development. And so here you have an image of a brain with different neural pathway developments at neonate, 2 years old, 6 years old, 13, and 22. So how brain development works. From birth, our brains are constantly evolving as neural pathways become stronger and communication becomes more efficient. As babies, our brains overproduce neurons, and throughout early childhood, some connections are strengthened while others are lost. Pruning. You might think of this process as similar to that of pruning a tree. It grows stronger and produces more as certain parts of it are trimmed back. By the time a child is 6 years old, his brain is already 90 to 95% the size that it will be as an adult. The same process happens again during the time just before puberty and extending until early adulthood. During this time, the brain is once again rapidly developing, strengthening those connections which are useful and ridding itself of others. So you can also think of it as pruning like a rose bush, right? You trim off the dead leaves, the dead flowers and stuff. You get rid of what you don't use. It's important to note that brain development happens through a sort of use it or lose it principle. If you use a particular piece of knowledge or skill set, then the neural pathways associated with it become stronger. But if you do not, then these pathways are never formed. This at least partly explains why students have difficulty learning a second language in the classroom after the age of 12. Without the opportunity to practice, the brain does not create new pathways for this knowledge. When you consider how quickly an adolescent's brain is still changing, it gives some insight as to why his behavior seems so erratic, as well as why he might not be pulling awesome grades in French right now. But what is specifically going on with the brain development of your teen? So we already went into the brain development of a teen in a couple slides back, right? Talking about these different things with the development, the gray matter, white matter, and everything. But this little piece, it's a little further down in the article, it talks about the impact of stress and trauma on the brain. Because the teen brain is developing at such a rapid rate, it is especially vulnerable to the effects of trauma and stress. Teenagers are at a greater risk of encountering trauma. Their risky behaviors as they seek to define themselves and achieve independence can often put them in conflict with parental or other authority figures. They also may encounter school or online bullying. Family trauma, such as divorce or death, can leave them in a vulnerable or uncertain position. We now know that trauma has a negative impact on childhood brain development. In fact, it can slow development of the prefrontal cortex, forcing adolescents to rely even more on their amygdala and limbic system. This can make it difficult for them to articulate their emotions or to explain their reasons for behaving in a certain way. Right? So if it's inhibiting my decision making, I'm functioning more out of my fight or flight dopamine systems, right? Like I'm looking for what makes me feel good. I'm functioning out of anxiety and self-defense and self-preservation, right? So behavioral and emotional changes. So sleep patterns, circadian rhythms, and homeostasis are affected during this phase of development. Delayed phase preference can be staying up later at night and sleeping in later. So you might see some teens, oh, I stayed up till midnight, woke up at 7, or woke up at 9, or I stayed up till 4 and then woke up at noon, right? You're seeing them sleep later. They don't have to have that regular 10 to 6, but of course, sleeping like that could negatively impact work and school. And there's table 9.2 that can be used in your book for parents with helping their teens get sleep regular. Emotions and mood, hormones, and other biological and environmental contributors can affect emotions and mood. Actually, one of the recommendations I give all of my clients is to go get vitamin, hormone, and thyroid blood panels done if they haven't already, whenever they're struggling with anxiety and depression issues, because those things being imbalanced absolutely can contribute to depression, anxiety issues. So as an example, hormones, if your progesterone, estrogen, or if your progesterone as a woman, estrogen or testosterone is off, that can cause depression. If you're a male and your estrogen, testosterone's off, that can cause depression. If your thyroid is hypothyroid, for example, you can experience depression and weight gain, which weight gain by itself, that might cause someone some anxiety, self-esteem issues. And then with vitamins, vitamin D deficiency can cause depression. I know somebody that has to take 20,000 IU of vitamin D a day or they feel depressed. And then also another example, iron deficiency can make you feel fatigued or even cause dizziness or vertigo. And so what do you think the emotions might be that come with that fatigue? And with that, it's easier to be anxious and easier to feel depressive feelings. So I would say, yeah, go take a bunch of vitamins, but if you did that blood panel, it'd better inform what vitamins you do or don't take. So that's a recommendation I give all my clients. And also, I tell them to look into drinking an electrolyte mix. Like I like Ultima Replenisher, ULTIMA, and then Replenisher. It's really great. It's paleo, keto, sugar-free, all the things, plant-based. It's wonderful. And they've got a bunch of flavors. Because a lot of people drink maybe too much water, and it actually can leave them dehydrated because it flushes out all the magnesium, zinc, and calcium and other different minerals and nutrients that they need. So it's important to mix it up and not just drink a bunch of water. But going back to this, so emotions and mood, and I've also seen a lot of teenagers that get dehydrated. So this can absolutely apply to them, not just adults. With emotions and mood, they're more emotionally reactive to stimuli than children or adults. They can be, which can be a risk factor for development of mental illness. Serious mental disorders may first occur in the teen years. So here's another chaotic image for you guys to see about the teen brain. So you see birds and the bees, the cars and the keys, phone addiction, drama, sports, stubbornness, invincibility, sleep deprivation, disorganized, escalated hormones, who am I, stress, inability to see dirt, computer, fixation lobe, self-conscious, the center of the univariate lobe. I can't read what that says. Music, gland, self-image, junk food zone, all the answers, under construction, the self-image. Center of the universe, that you lobe, that's what that says. And then you just see a bunch of different emotions on the edges that can be experienced by the teen. So that's just another image for y'all to check out. Depression in adolescence. So depressed mood is seen in 1/3 of teens, more so in girls. Disadvantages of early maturation include risk of internalizing and externalizing externalizing problems. There's an increased incidence of depression. So internalizing means blaming the self or holding things in. Externalizing is putting things outside of the self onto others. Girls are bigger, heavier than their peers. They're sexually involved earlier. Boys have social liability to be different, and that can lead to peer rejection. There are challenges for girls during puberty. They feel less valued. They have body image concerns, inequalities, double standards, ineffective discourse with boys. Sexual debut may be part of that, and they begin secondary school during puberty. Teens may use rumination and distraction coping strategies. So rumination, overthinking on things, and distraction, do anything to anything to avoid thinking about whatever's stressing them out. So distraction. I'm gonna go listen to some music. I'm gonna go play basketball for 10 hours instead of talking to my dad about the issue, right? I'm gonna use a distraction. So looking at depression signs and symptoms, I tried to find this image with the tiny words all cleared up, but that's as clear as they're gonna get. And I also just noticed that thoughts is misspelled right there. But signs and symptoms of teen depression: helplessness, guilt, anger, withdrawing from friends and family, struggling to concentrate. They may experience thoughts of death, changes in appetite. So that could be either they're eating a lot more or eating a lot less. Energy loss, sleeping problems. They can be sleeping a lot more or sleeping a lot less, and they may even engage in alcohol or drug abuse. So these are things to watch out for with teens. And then looking at bipolar disorder, I found this image and they had the columns mislabeled. So if you go look this up, you're going to find it looking different with the labels at the top. But symptoms of depression with bipolar disorder, you're going to see feelings of sadness or hopelessness, loss of interest in pleasurable activities, which is what's called anhedonia. Negative thoughts about the future. So bleak outlook on the future. It can't get better. It's always going to be crappy. Those kinds of things. Loss of energy. So being lethargic. They may experience insomnia where they can't fall asleep, or hyposomnia where they're sleeping too much. Talks of suicide or death, self-harm. I don't want to be here anymore. I wish I wouldn't wake up. I'd rather be dead, or I'm going to kill myself. It really could go that far. Treatments include medication, psychotherapy, and electroconvulsive therapy, which is known as ECT. It is very poorly represented by Hollywood. So for anybody that is a fan of the Joker, or any of those kind of Marvel movies, I believe it's Marvel. I can't ever get those things straight. But oh goodness, what's her name? Harley Quinn. She was a psychiatrist that the Joker, she fell in love with him, and then he gave her electroconvulsive therapy to her head while she was still awake, and it zapped her brain and made her permanently crazy and all these things. So with ECT, actually, a patient is put under anesthesia, and it's a psychiatrist monitors the whole thing, and they go to sleep, and then they'll put the ultrasound gel either here and here, here and here, and they use these metal, it's kind of like how like a baby ultrasound has like that flat metal end on it, and you rub it on the belly. It's like two of those, but it's giving electroconvulsive shock to the brain, and it causes a seizure for like 15 seconds. The body doesn't seize or anything. You just literally lay there in your sleep. I've watched someone be administered the treatment. It's a 15-second administered seizure, and then they go into recovery. This is something that's usually used for adults that are medication resistant, treatment resistant. They have a very flat affect, and they're just really depressed, and nothing's really working. And it's like for really severe cases. So it's not like, oh yeah, go get electroconvulsive therapy, see if that works. It's usually for the more severe cases. For less severe, there's also what's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. And it's where there's no anesthesia or anything. You sit in a chair and you wear this magnet helmet for about 15 minutes. You can watch TV or you can go to sleep, whatever you want to do. And it's getting the hemoglobin and blood flow in your brain how you'd like it to be. Less invasive, but both have side effects, like short-term memory loss can be an issue and different things. But usually those are things that are explored after people have tried different medications and treatments, and those just aren't doing it for them. And then bipolar disorder. So just that was reviewing depression. So what is bipolar disorder? It has a depressive symptoms side, but it also has a mania side. And so looking at this down here, bipolar disorder is a mental health condition that causes extreme mood swings that include emotional highs, mania or hypomania, and lows, depression. Bipolar disorder affects approximately 1% of the global population, and the most common age at which symptoms begin is 25. But children can experience bipolar disorder. So symptoms of mania. It can involve poor concentration, easily distracted, poor appetite and weight loss, sleeping little, racing speech and impulsiveness, jumping from one idea to another, heightened sense of self-importance, so grandiose thinking. Risk factors include having a first-degree relative with bipolar disorder, periods of high stress, and drug or alcohol abuse. So bipolar disorder is one of those ones that typically there's a genetic component to it. Okay, so now I'm going to show you guys an image. I'm going to draw it for you of what somebody showed to me, and it really helped me to differentiate between different mood disorders, depressive disorders, because I was having a hard time with that. So I'm going to just do a normal mood is here. So a normal mood is relatively stable, right? We don't, we get happy, we get sad, we have our stressors, we have different things that happen. Oh, these are really pretty colors. What color do I want to use? I'll use pink. There are sometimes these mood disorders that people can experience. So bipolar type 1 disorder has these big swings from depression to mania to depression to mania. And something that mania can involve is what's called psychosis. Okay. And people often think that psychosis is number of different things, but just to clarify what it is for you guys, so that can involve hallucinations, which is hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, or feeling things that aren't really there, right? So I see bats or demons flying around this room when very evidently there's just my ceiling fan, right? There's no bats or demons that are in here right now. Now, if I was having another form of psychosis, it could involve illusions, which is where I turn things in my environment into something else. So let's say I have this poppet toy. I think this is an octopus about to jump on my face, right? Or I think this water bottle is a snake that's about to wrap around my neck and kill me. Or I think that this is a spider that's about to jump on my face. I don't know, right? I'm turning things in my environment into something else, right? And the third aspect of psychosis that can be experienced is delusions. And so delusions are believing things to be true that actually aren't. So that might involve believing the year to be a different year than it actually is, believing you're somewhere you're not, believing you're with someone that you're not, different things. So for an example, when I worked at a psychiatric hospital, there was a patient there that believed Princess Diana was his mother. And he was at the Omni Hotel, and he was practicing for Dancing with the Stars. And all day long, he was practicing his dance routines. When you look at him during the day, and he was just coloring and coloring books. You ask him how his dance routine's going. He's like, oh, practice is going great. Like, he just didn't know what was going on. Bless him. So yeah, psychosis can involve hallucinations, delusions, and illusions. And interestingly, sometimes people don't actually know this. You can actually experience psychosis in a depressive episode. So not always the case, but it can happen for people. So now looking at the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, use another marker here. So bipolar 2 is going to have those swings, but not as big, right? I really don't like how uneven that is, so I'm going to redo it. So they're going to have the swings, but not be as big as the bipolar 1 disorder, right? So you'll have what's called hypomania, which the previous slide talked about down here. See, hypomania, mania, hypomania. So that's that bipolar type 2, right? Then you've got another type, which is called persistent depressive disorder. Now, this used to be called dysthymia, but it's now called persistent depressive disorder. And what that looks like is a varying depression that never quite gets to normal. So you get close, but not there. You get close to feeling good, but you don't get all the way there. And it's a fluctuating depression that goes up and down, right? And then as a final example, let's use yellow, why not? Or orange, macaroni and cheese. I think that's what that color is still called. Major depressive disorder is just where you have a flat depression. And it can be at varying levels depending on whether or not it's mild, moderate, or severe. But it's usually just like baseline, like I'm flat depressed. Like I might have a little bit of a better day, but it kind of just stays where it's at, right? But this is a way that I had it explained to me, and it made it really clear to understand what the differences between these things were. So just to make sure it's clear, right? This is your normal mood, right? And then that's bipolar type 1 is the pink, the light pink. Bipolar type 2 is the teal. Persistent depressive disorder is the hot pink. And then major depressive disorder is the macaroni and cheese, or mustard yellow, whichever color you prefer. And of course, if you have any questions about this model, or you want to screenshot this, feel free. Or if you have questions, post them in the comments, or if you want to screenshot this to save for later for education purposes, go for it. I show this to clients all the time. I draw it on paper for them a lot. Like here's an example of that. I don't know if y'all can see my camera, but there's literally a document that I use with clients to educate them on depressive disorders, or they just got a bipolar disorder and diagnosis and they don't know what that means. And I'll use that to help them understand themselves. And they'll be like, yeah, that's how I feel. Or if you have a client that comes in and they don't understand their mood, you can show them these graphs and they can be like, oh, that's the one that I feel like. I feel like the hot pink. I feel like the bright pink. Yeah, I'm all over the place. So sometimes people are the better expert on, a lot of the time, people are the better expert on themselves rather than the doctor. So let them tell you, right? Educating them could empower them to better understand themselves and even be more bought into treatment. Okay, emergence. Oh, let me hide the ribbon there. Okay, so emergence of sexuality and sexual preference. So adrenarche is increase in the adrenal gland activity before puberty. It's the beginning of sexual attraction around age 10, and then there's increase in sexual interest, fantasizing, and masturbation. So for anybody that's a parent out there, if you start seeing your children engaging in masturbation behaviors around the age of 10, that's completely normal. If it's much earlier than that, that could be an indicator for sexual trauma, but not necessarily. You can see table 9.3 in your books for the rates and ages of intercourse by gender and race. Sexual behavior is familial, social, and has cultural factors that affect that behavior. Maturation also has an effect. There's an early debut involving more pregnancy, or early debut can lead to more pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases. Sexual fluidity for some teenagers involving homosexual and bisexual exploration. There's a survey involving 89% of high school students in the US are heterosexual, and there's evidence of genetic factors in prenatal hormones, which are non-social influences that would affect sexual orientation. So this is a neat little, I'm gonna get this off of there. Okay. This is a neat little image that I found by Sieving et al. 2002. So it talks about the individual and how the individual is impacted by family, peers, in the community. So and it has to do with sexual behavior and sexual health. So risk factors related to family involve low parental education, low parental expectation, family suicide attempts and completions, and permissive attitudes towards sex. So these are risk factors that could lead to unhealthy sexual development. Protective factors in a family, if they exist, involve being caring, connectedness, clear expectations to avoid intercourse, clear expectations to use contraception, family spacing, parental monitoring, and clear expectations for school completion. Peer risk factors involve normative, unprotected sexual activity. So that means if it's normal among their peers to have sex that's unprotected, that's a risk factor. If substance use is normalized, if they're around older peers, so like a third grader hanging out with eighth graders, right? Not a very positive thing potentially because of different levels of development. Early dating and romantic relationships could be a risk factor, and popularity is even a risk factor for sexual development. Protective factors involve perception of peer condom use, a positive perception of peer condom use, contraception that is supported by their partner, sexual partner, and friends that are close to their parents could be a protective factor. In terms of the school, being out of school is a risk factor. A protective factor is having good attachment, academic success, and sexuality education in the school. And then for the community and neighborhood, it's a risk factor to come from a low median income, low median education, a high divorce rate family, and a high residential turnover. So the neighbors are always moving, you're always moving. And then, or the client's always moving perhaps. And then protective community factors for sexual development, involvement in religious institutions, low teen marital birth rate, and close-knit community network. So that means involved in community activities or volunteering and things. And these things all affect the individual. So individual risk factors involve early maturation, sexual abuse, alcohol, substance abuse, emotional distress, being male, being impulsive, delinquency, and unmet intimacy needs. Right, very Freudian, making you think maybe you're Freud, Oedipus, and Electra complexes. But protection factors include their beliefs and attitudes that support responsible sexual behavior, sexual self-efficacy, attending religious services and having religious beliefs, and then having life options, skills, and opportunities instead of having perhaps lack of opportunity. That could be a risk factor. So sexual health risk behaviors and situations. So sexual coercion could be a problem, unprotected intercourse, having multiple sexual partners, and substance use occurring with sexual activity. For anybody that plans to get into the addiction world, sometimes you'll see sex addicts also having a cocaine issue because it can lead to longer, or males having a cocaine issue because it can lead to a longer erection, longer sexual activity. So that's just something to know. And then also, if anybody doesn't know it, alcohol use could lead to impotence issues. Healthy outcomes in sexual reproductive health. Physically, they're free from STDs, HIV, and their sequelae, like sterility, being sterile. It delays pregnancy and they achieve full physical maturity. Emotionally, there's gender equality and reproductive health and family planning. They're free of victimization. They have the ability to determine their healthy relationships with the same sex and opposite sex, and they have the ability to enjoy and experience fulfillment within healthy relationships. So you see, sexual development isn't just limited to the physical anatomy. There's environmental factors, social factors that absolutely influence the way that sexuality can develop for your client. And so that's definitely something to know in the counseling relationship. You know, if you get a 12-year-old that's coming in with a pornography issue, where did that come from? Right? Are they exposed to their parents having sex? Do they have unlimited access to the internet and they can Google anything they want? Is it a peer influence thing that their friend told them to look something up? Or is there a predator that's acting on their youth naivete, right? Youthful naivete, right? So yes, adolescent sexual behavior is a big thing, and it is multifaceted for sure, something to know when working with adolescents. And then also something to know about using substances. So if a client, I think I've mentioned this before in another lecture, if not, I'll mention it now, that substance use at an early age can lead to what's called stunted maturation, where emotional maturation, where they are emotionally stunted at the age at which they started using substances until they stop using. So if I get somebody that's 40 years old, that's been smoking weed and drinking alcohol since age 12, when he gets sober, he's going to have the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old because he never learned how to deal with emotions in a sober way. And so there's going to be a lot of coping skills that have to be used. So you can see emotional regression, immaturity regression with substance use and in addiction. So it's just something to know. Or even in phases where people get it like a prognosis to live only a few months, you might see some regression where they're acting out adolescent wants and needs that never were fulfilled, or all different kinds of things, which I think you guys will learn more about as you get through your program. Cognitive development in adolescence, they recede in limitation of concrete operational thought and develop a capacity for formal thought, which is difficult even for adults. It involves focus on relationships that govern specific contents, coordination of multiple relationships. There is improvement in executive functions, processing speed, working memory expansion, and attentional control. They succeed with more abstract subject matter by age 12. They generate and test hypotheses, analyze literary works at multiple levels, and solve algebraic equations. In terms of scientific problem solving, formal operational thinkers' approach to scientific problem solving involves the below 4 points. Generate a list of all possible solutions. Abstract thinking is required. It's not dependent on concrete observations. They carefully test each solution, systematically examine results, and the pattern of results among all tests drives the conclusions. Note to helpers, which is us counselors or counselors in the making. Clients may need help in formal operational reasoning to consider diverse solutions to problems, which I believe I included it in this slideshow. Maybe I put it in the next one. But cost benefit analysis, weighing the pros and cons of decisions, is a very important skill that a lot of people don't get taught or learn. And so it can be really useful for you to teach them how to do that. So characteristics of formal operational thought, there's abstract, idealistic, and logical characteristics. So the abstract, adolescents think more abstractly than children. They're formal operational thinkers and can solve abstract algebraic equations, for example. Idealistically, adolescents often think about what is possible. They think about ideal characteristics of themselves, others in the world, like what they would like it to be. And logical thinking. Adolescents begin to think more like scientists, devising plans to solve problems and systematically testing solutions. Piaget called this type of logical thinking hypothetical deductive reasoning. Okay. The ability to construct ideals in adolescence, it contributes to critical attitudes, skepticism about justifications others often give for the status quo. They conceive ideal schools, religions, political systems, and more. Their ideals are not real. They omit limitations of the concrete world. So they need more experiences with difficulties to become realistic. So experiencing young adulthood where they challenge and fail and see what actually works. Adolescent egocentrism involves failing to see the real limits of their own ideas. This applies to judgment of self and others. The self-critic sees imperfections, inadequacies, and this may contribute to disorders like anorexia, because they have unrealistic expectations of what they should look like, or what they can look like, rather. Advances in metacognitive skill, thinking about thought. So there's a greater ability to think critically about themselves, about the way they think and behave, which is a metacognitive skill. Positive effect involves scientific thinking, more careful planning and evaluation of their own activities. Negative effects, other forms of egocentrism emerge. There's the imaginary audience, which is critical and leads to self-consciousness. The personal fable, which involves feeling special and fantasizing about special destiny. Invincibility fable, which involves feeling invulnerable and mortal and can lead to risk-taking. So I can't get hurt, right? And these things contribute to egocentrism. These other things are involved in the egocentrism that teenagers display. Cognitive abilities, anxiety, the need to separate from parents and form an adult identity. So here's an image just showing you again the different egocentrism stages. David Elkind. So the adolescent egocentrism, they're overly concerned with their own thoughts and feelings. The imaginary thought audience is they believe others are watching them constantly. I know that I definitely believe that. Like you're at the mall and you hear someone laugh and you think they're laughing at you. I remember that. Personal fable. Adolescents believe that their experiences and feelings are unique. And the illusion of invulnerability. Adolescents think that misfortune only happens to others. And here's a little cartoon. So Elkind's imaginary audience, they feel peers are constantly watching their performance, much like actors are watched. And you can see there's the little parents are talking here. Walt, turn the radio down. You're doing that Mick Jagger thing with your lips again. And I think it's embarrassing, Jeremy. You see the kid in the backseat. I'm not related to these people. Right? So they're worrying everybody's watching. Oh my God, Mom, you're so embarrassing, right? Okay, so identity development in adolescence. What do I want to make of myself? What do I have to work with? Erickson's idea of ego identity, the doing side of personality. So there's task or challenge of identity versus identity confusion. Choices, experiences bring one closer or further from meaningful sense of self. Recognizing also that identity is always in revision. There's emphasis by Erickson on power of social context to shape personality development. A contemporary notion is that highest values in one's the highest values in one's cultural context, affects, self-representations, worldviews, and commitments. Identity status, ideas of James Marcia, or Marcia, I'm not sure exactly how to say that. Two processes are involved: exploration and commitment, which result in 4 identity statuses. Identity achievement, exploration, and commitment have occurred. Identity diffusion, there's no exploration or commitment that's occurred. Foreclosure is commitment is adopted without exploration, and a moratorium is active exploration but no commitment yet. And this is deemed by Erickson as the essence of the adolescent mind. There are different statuses on different topics of religion, career, and politics, and each identity status is associated with personal and cognitive characteristics. Now, as you guys know, I love images to help me understand things. So here is the 4 identity states by Marcia from 1966. So you see commitment level versus crisis level, which the next one's going to talk about exploration. So commitment versus exploration here. And so you can see identity achievement, it's been challenged and commitments made, but open to new opportunities. Foreclosure, acceptance of identity, not open to exploration. Diffusion, no exploration or commitment to identity. And then moratorium, in the process of challenging identity, actively exploring self and identity. And then here's another image depicting the different ones, with a little quote to demonstrate what each one is. Foreclosure, I've made a choice without thinking. Identity achievement, I thought about it and I now know what I should do with my life. Moratorium, I'm thinking about what I should do. And diffusion, I don't know and I don't care what I'm supposed to do with my own life. Very different. And then here's another one that just shows each of them low and high, low and high, low and high without the external descriptors. But I feel like the other one with the yes, no, and such, these are easier to read than this guy, but there's another one that you can consider. And then I found this graphic on an article by, I have no idea how to say this last name, Loikix, that's my guess, not really sure. But it's on identity formation and emerging adulthood, on trajectories, antecedents, and consequences. And so these are different people who have hypothesized about identity formation in different classes or types or levels that they involve. So Marcia has achievement, moratorium, foreclosure, diffusion. Josselson there, Cote and Levine there, Helson and Srivastava there, Loisik, Schwartz, Gossens, and Sonens are these ones here. So I don't know if you guys are going to be exposed to these other researchers, but here is a picture to help you organize how they compare. Okay. Assessing identity formation. So often assessed, it's often assessed with questionnaires, interviews, narrative, talking through their stories. Who are you? Narrative therapy is about telling your story. How do you tell it? Personality and cognitive characteristics affect and are affected by identity formation. The level of anxiety, internal, external control, religiosity, risk-taking, openness, conscientiousness, positive well-being, and more affect these things. And if it hasn't already been clarified to you by me or someone else, internal, external control is a belief that you have the possibility of affecting your world. You have the ability to affect your world and make change and make your life different, versus that's internal control. Versus external control is the world is not up to you. What happens to you isn't your choice. You can't affect things that happen in your life. So if persons have external locus of control, that means they don't feel like they can make changes in their life. And that's obviously a problem, because what's the only thing that we can control? Ourselves, right? We can't control anything else but ourselves. So you assessing that is important, to look at whether somebody is optimistic, pessimistic, nihilistic, positive, whatever. And then also developmental sequence trends from longitudinal studies. Progressive changes are more likely than regressive changes, and repeated cycles of exploration and reevaluation. So this is just something important or interesting for you guys to know. It's called the Johari window by Eklund. This is an article by Eklund about the Johari window. It was actually developed by Joseph Luft and Harry Ingram in 1955 when they were researching group dynamics at UCLA. Its odd name is amusing because it's their names put together, Joe and Harry, Johari, or Joe Harry, maybe that's how it's supposed to be said. At its most basic, the Johari window helps people understand their self-perception and the perception others have of them by organizing information into a 4-square matrix based on 2 opposing axes: what a person knows or doesn't know about themselves, and what others know or don't know about that person. When merged, the resulting quadrants define a person in 4 perspectives, known as areas, also windows or panes. This understanding of oneself can help in many ways, in particular for developing and training individuals and teams, for increasing effective communications among leaders, managers, and team members, and for establishing and understanding group dynamics and intergroup relationships. So this absolutely could be related to helping adolescents figuring out group interactions and doing group therapy and all these things. So the 4 areas are open, what a person knows about themselves that's known by others in the team or group; blind spot, what a person does not know about themselves but which others know; facade or masked, what a person knows about themselves but others do not know; and then unknown, what is unknown by the person about themselves and is also unknown by others. And here's a graph or a graphic to demonstrate the Johari window, to show different ways that you can show who you are to team members, which can affect levels of trust and teamwork mentality. And that's something that'd be useful to know if you're working with a group full of teens. What are their attitudes? Do they have blind spots? Are they unknown? Are they open? These kinds of things. Identity development in diverse groups. So inconsistent results on gender differences in identity formation. There's some indication that women assign higher priority to interpersonal communal aspects of self. Pre-adolescent children rank gender as a highly important category. Racial and ethnic identity formation also occurs. There's not salient features of self-concept until adolescence. They may be triggered by experiences of discrimination. Ethnic racial identity, ERI development, is comparable to other identity domains. Stronger ERI is seen as a protective factor and supports well-being. Ethnic and racial socialization practices help build stronger ERI as well. Issues in the study of ethnic or racial and sexuality development. So disagreement and uncertainty about categories of gender and sexual orientation. It does exist. There's different use of race, ethnicity, and culture by various authors. We can't assume homogeneity among members of a race or ethnic group on variables such as ethnic identity, which homogeneity, what does that mean? Homo means same. Homogeneity would mean that we can't assume all white people have the same experience of ethnicity and culture, or all Black people have the same experience of ethnicity and culture, all Chinese, Japanese, Samoan, Cherokee Indian, Canadian, whatever. They're not all the same, whatever race or ethnicity you can think of. We cannot assume that each person may have their own experience that is completely different from the next person. Race is a non-issue in conceptualization of identity for whites. They may fail to recognize how being white influences attitudes and behaviors towards themselves and members of other groups, and it can contribute to failure in perspective taking and problems of white dominance and privilege. So it can, doesn't say that it will or that it does. So different people, different experiences. So some people may be very aware, some people may not be aware at all. That's why it's important to get to know your clients or get to know people to determine how different they are from stereotypes or how similar perhaps if they are. Applications, influence of culture and context. Note to educators, therapists, and parents. You want to support exploration of healthy, developmentally appropriate routes for expressing independence, for feeling part of a social group, and for experiencing satisfaction and accomplishment. I always tell clients the worst place for mental health issues and addictions to thrive is in isolation. So plugging people into a group is always a really great idea to help them not feel alone and to also find support. An obstruction to the process of development could be early college decisions, committing to careers in high school, bypassing exploration, and being indecisive. It's a more complicated process for adolescents from marginalized or other disadvantaged groups. Socialization practices and identity development programs may assist with this. And you can also look at table 9.5 in your books to look at international perspectives on identity development. Applications helping sexual minority youth, clinical guidelines for working with sexual minority youth, consider your own attitudes, anxieties, and judgments. They may try to hide sexual identity and discount sexual feelings, allow for openness, provide a safe place for honest self-exploration, and consider fluidity of process, which may involve changing orientations, because they are fluidly exploring who they are, how they are, what they are, why they believe what they believe, all these different things throughout their teenage years. And so one week to the next, sexuality and identity can change. It's just the nature of development. You want to help the client identify reliable support and assist in accessing that support. So being an advocate for them. Strengthen family attachment, help them strengthen family attachments, given that the family is a healthy unit. Family support is seen as a key protective factor, which maybe family therapy might be warranted if the family attachments aren't healthy. And this strengthening of attachments may involve supporting family members in understanding their fears and uncertainties about the child's sexual identity. Table 9.6 in your book has ways to communicate with transgender youth. So I've got a little slideshow here from ACA on developing the skill of bracketing, which maybe you guys don't know what that is, but you're about to find out. So David Kaplan is an ACA Chief Professional Officer that put these slides together. I don't have the whole slideshow, just a handful of them. So bracketing is an explicit focus on avoiding the imposition of a counselor's personal values. So it's putting a bracket around what you think and feel to be right and true and perfect and the best way to live your life, and whether that's ethically, morally, sexually, gender-wise, religious, whatever it is, you bracket that, you put it in a box, pack it away, and you don't let your personal values impact the counseling relationship or the client. So it's actually ethical from the ACA Code of Ethics to bracket your personal values. So section A4B talks about personal values, and it actually states, counselors are aware of and avoid imposing their own values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Bracketing is a very important aspect of counseling, which is exactly what this slide was talking about, right? Allow openness, provide a safe place for honest exploration, right? Consider your own attitudes, anxieties, and judgments, right? So this also extends to referrals. So when you're referring clients, are you referring due to bias, or are you referring due to competency issues and there's somebody that's more skilled in your area? So section A11B, counselors refrain from referring prospective and current clients based on solely the counselor's personally held values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, right? Which some of you guys may have heard of the Julia Ward versus East Michigan University, I think Eastern Michigan University, where she referred a client. She was a Christian counselor and received a client referral that was, the client was homosexual. And because she was a Christian, she didn't agree and she referred, and that client came back and sued, and the university ended up dismissing her from the program. And there was like a settlement, and there's all these things. I think most recently she was given a monetary settlement and was allowed to complete her program at a different institution. But yes, this is a very serious thing, because our number one value in the counseling ethical world, right, is to do no harm, which is, I think, A1A or A2A. It's the very beginning. Ethical bracketing. So this is the intentional setting aside of a counselor's personal values from his or her professional values in order to provide ethical and appropriate counseling to all clients, especially those whose worldviews, values, belief systems, and decisions differ from those of the counselor. So that's the end of those slides. So bracketing, extremely important. So we're not biased and we aren't doing client harm. So focus on developmental psychopathology, eating disorders, anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, and others can develop during this time. Anorexia is deadly, but something sobering to know, you're 57 times more likely to die from suicide if you're struggling with anorexia. Risk factors include etiology, genetics, pre-morbid psychiatric conditions, personality characteristics like being more prone to being impulsive, cultural family pressure, environmental settings. Table 9.7 in your book has risk factors for eating disorders. Treatment, you treat distinctive disorders with approaches proven effective for that disorder. For example, CBT is shown to be really effective for eating disorders. And Stice and Shaw offer prevention program guidelines. They also have this facilitator's guide for eating disorder interventions called the Body Project that I found online. And you can check that out later on. It's available on Amazon. All right, chapter 9, questions. So based on studies of children in the US, Menarche and Spamarche occur earlier today than in children, even 20 years ago. Which following groups of children reaches these maturation milestones earliest? African American, Caucasian, Hispanic American, or Asian American? African American. Different regions of the brain develop at different rates during adolescence. Which area matures faster than the others? Neural circuitry, planning and control function, prefrontal cortex, or the limbic system? Limbic system. In dealing with stressors during adolescence, which of the following is the most likely effect of the rumination coping style? Which rumination is overthinking about things. Direct attention externally, decrease emotional reactivity, increase intensity of depressed mood, and distract from focus on the problem. Increase intensity of depressed mood. Current evidence lends strongest support to which of the following influences on sexual orientation? Environmental conditions after birth, modeling of sexual orientation by adults, Freud's view of parenting patterns, or genetic influence in prenatal hormones. D, genetic influence in prenatal hormones. Metacognitive skills advance during adolescence. Which of the following illustrates a negative side of improved metacognitive skill? A, less introspection, B, focus on others, C, imaginary audience, or D, more objectivity in evaluating beliefs. Imaginary audience. Allie's 8th grade academic work is a little more advanced than what she is used to. She is having a hard time keeping up, particularly in science, which is her first period course. The teacher moves very fast despite the fact that most of the students look glassy-eyed from too little sleep. What is a puberty-related biological explanation for the student's behavior in science class? A, sexual dimorphism, B, early menarche, C, androgen imbalance, or D, delayed phase preference. Delayed phase preference. What does Savin-Williams argue about the nature of sexual orientation? It is a fluid concept for some teens. It is determined in utero. It is determined earlier for boys than for girls, or it might, homosexuality might be fostered if children have homosexual teachers. A, sexual orientation is a fluid concept for some teens. Which of the following elements is most closely associated with the concept of the imaginary audience? A sense of invulnerability, pride, destiny, or shame? Imaginary audience. Sense of shame. All right, last slide. So questions for the comments. So I'd love for you guys to answer these, one or both. So one, what aspect of adolescent identity development do you think will be the hardest to counsel in the future as a therapist, and why? And two, what do you think are some important considerations regarding identity development when working with LGBTQ plus adolescents? Feel free to leave your answers in the comments below. Thank you for your time, and I'll catch you in the next lecture. Thanks.